Well, we are officially a full house. Hello, all 500 of you out there tonight. It is a great pleasure to have you join us to talk about owls. Who doesn't love owls? My name's Sean. I'm with North Branch Nature Center. I'm the Director of Public Programming. And I want to say a huge thank you to our co-sponsor for tonight, Green Mountain Audubon Society, for making this possible. It's wonderful to have a collaboration between Green Mountain Audubon and North Branch Nature Center. So if you haven't spent much time on our websites, please go visit our websites, check things out, see what we do, see what programs are coming up. If you like tonight's program, please feel free to head over to the websites, become a member, make a donation, and help support the work that we do. I'll also, since we're talking about owls tonight, mention that we have an Adopt an Owl program at North Branch Nature Center. So many of you may know that we do northern saw-whet owl research when fall migration season comes around. I'm sure Zach will mention that here or there tonight. And so if you'd like to support the Nature Center with an adopted owl, you can head over and make a donation. We'll send you a certificate with your owl's photograph on it. You don't get to take it home. It's a symbolic adoption. But we'll send you a photo of your owl, its band number, all of the information from when we captured the owl. And then anytime that owl shows up at any point in the future, either our research station or elsewhere in the country, we'll send you a note and let you know where your owl is and what it's been up to the best of our knowledge. So anyway, that's enough of that. I know Zach's got a great program for us tonight, so I will just go ahead and turn it right over to Zach, our teacher-naturalist at North Branch Nature Center. Thanks, Zach.
Thank you, Sean. Yeah, and thank you all for joining me this evening. I love talking about owls. I'm constantly talking about owls, and I'm so glad that you all have joined. My program, we build it as an hour long, but I will likely go a little bit over that. And of course, I will stick around and talk to you folks about owls afterwards and answer questions as long as you'd like. So I'm going to get started right away because I have just so much I want to cover in the next hour or so. And we're going to go, talking about all of the owls of Vermont, but really much more than that. We're going to look at, what is an owl? We're going to talk a little bit about owls and our culture, some pretty amazing owls all over the world, how to identify the owls we might see here in Vermont, and then a bit about ecology, conservation, and how to go out and find them. So what is an owl? They are really specialized raptors. They're pretty amazing. They're the first appearing in the fossil record about 60 million years ago. So they're a pretty ancient line of birds. And what allows them to be nocturnal hunters are some of these adaptations of their faces in particular. So this round, flat face that we'll look at later kind of funnels the sound into their ears. That hooked raptor bill and those really big, wide-set eyes. This is a look at the owl's ears, and you can see that an owl skull is actually not symmetrical. So unlike us, where we have ears that are exactly opposite each other on our skull, an owl has one ear that's a little bit higher and more forward than the other, while the other ear is a little bit lower and set further back. And that asymmetrical skull shape allows them to really triangulate a prey item that's maybe moving underneath the snow. That gives them that exceptional ability to hear and really figure out where something is underneath the snow. The other day I got to see a barred owl that was hunting. It flew down from a perch, flew across a field, and went talons first through the snow and came immediately out with a rodent. So from across the other side of the field, this barred owl was able to know exactly where that rodent was, and using this ear adaptation. They also have really specialized feathers that we don't see really in other groups of birds. The outside feather of the outside flight feather, their leading flight feather, is sort of broken on the edge. You can see that picture on the left where it doesn't form a clean line. And as the owl is flying, that allows just a little bit of air to slip through its feathers. And that's actually how owls fly silently. That little bit of air that passes through that leading feather muffles the sound. And so it allows them to hunt without their prey knowing they're coming. And owls have a really important place in our culture, actually. Some of the earliest depictions of owls on art are 30,000 years ago in ancient cave drawings in France. And you can see owl iconography all over the world of all different eras, which is pretty amazing. And one of the reasons that owls play such an important role in our culture is this connection they have with agriculture, but also just the look of an owl, that round face with two really big forward-facing eyes is sort of reminiscent of other humans. And so they really have developed this important place in our culture where they're really charismatic and instantly recognizable. I want to talk about some really amazing owls all over the world. We have some great ones here in Vermont, but there are some spectacular owls other places. We'll talk about the ones that are really the superlatives of the owl world. So our smallest owl actually lives here in North America. It's native to the desert Southwest and through Central America. It's the elf owl. They are really tiny. At most, they are just under 6 inches long. So shorter than a dollar bill is long, and a wingspan of only 10.5 inches. They're pretty amazing little predators, and they are about the size of a sparrow. And they're nesting in cavities, so they're even nesting in cactus in the desert Southwest and eating mainly insects and other invertebrates. So think of an owl that's smaller than, say, a dollar bill. It's pretty amazing. Our tallest owl is the great gray owl. So the opposite is over 33 inches tall. So really a massive, tall bird. And the great gray owl is an owl of the northern boreal forests. So breeding in really dense forests, often near meadows or wetlands, openings in the forest. And we don't see them often in Vermont, but every once in a while they make their way south. And we'll talk about eruptions of owls a little bit later. The heaviest, and one of my favorite owls, is Blackeston's fish owl. So this owl is a little bit shorter than the great gray owl, but it weighs 10 pounds, which is the same weight as a bald eagle. So this is an owl that is the size, about the size of a bald eagle. So really a massive bird. And think it is 3 times heavier than a great horned owl, which is the biggest owl we have here in Vermont. And what's amazing about this bird is that they're living in really cold places. They're living in Siberia and Eastern Russia. They're living in northern Japan. And yet they're making a living eating fish and frogs. So they are hunting primarily in open water all year round in some of the coldest places on Earth. They're finding these breaks in the ice and rivers, and they're hunting fish. Unfortunately, the population of this birds is really been put in jeopardy by forestry practices. And we think there's less than 4,000 of these owls left on Earth. So there's some pretty amazing conservation efforts going on right now to understand their lives and how to protect them. And I'll share with you a book that has just come out that is all about these owls and researching them. I want to show you a quick clip of this owl so you can appreciate what it looks like, particularly what it looks like when it's hunting. And there you can get an appreciation of just how massive that fish owl is. The wingiest owl, that is the owl with the biggest wingspan, is not quite as heavy as Blackeston's fish owl, is the Eurasian Eagle Owl. So all over Europe and Asia, they have this massive owl that looks similar and is related to our great horned owl, but it's much bigger with a wingspan over 6.5 feet long. And it's pretty amazing that some owls can be fairly long-lived, particularly in captivity. So there are records of this species living 60 years in a zoo, which is amazing for a bird. And they're nesting all sorts of different places, including taking over old golden eagle nests. So they'll actually displace golden eagles from their nests. That's a pretty amazing bird to be able to kick an eagle out of its nest. And perhaps the rarest is the newest owl known to science. The long-whiskered owlet was first discovered in Peru back in the 70s. It lives in this really dense cloud forest. It's a really unique looking owl. It has this really long whiskers on its face, which they believe helps it find its prey, which are mainly flying insects. So they think that those whiskers allow it to sense vibrations in the air from flying insects, and really short wings and a short tail. And there's not a lot known about it because the places where it lives, it's extremely hard to access and to find this owl. So pretty amazing bird. I'm going to play you, this is a recording of the sound of this owl, which is pretty amazing. Really, really interesting. I'm going to play some sounds throughout. I hope you're hearing them okay, because I want you to get to understand. Most people, when you think of an owl, folks are thinking of hooting. But owls make an amazing variety of vocalizations. Some of them do hoot, but some of them make a lot of different calls. And then our most widespread owl is actually the barn owl, and they live on every continent except for Antarctica, including having made it all the way to some islands in the middle of the Pacific, which is pretty amazing. And this owl is so widespread that as it has evolved, there are really distinct subspecies. And in the future, they might find that these subspecies are actually their own species. But right now, the barn owl lives on pretty much all over the planet. And then one of the most unique owls we have is the burrowing owl. This owl lives underground in prairies and open treeless habitats throughout the Americas. It lives in colonies, so it's an owl that's living in a group. And the females are coming out in the middle of the day to hunt for insects. And the males are coming out at night to hunt. And they're actually parenting in shifts. So it's pretty amazing, very different from other owls in that it's living underground and hunting out during the day and living in a colony. So owl lives are pretty diverse. There are a lot of different strategies that owls use. So I want to talk for a little bit about the Owls of Vermont and get you familiar with what you might see regularly and what you can go and look for. Some really exciting birds here. Now we have a number of species that I've shown with an asterisk that have nested here before. And we also have a few that have nested here in the past, but don't nest here anymore. And we have a few that come here on occasion, and they can be really exciting to see, like the owl on the left, which is a northern hawk owl. Those we see in Vermont maybe once every 10 years, and it's really exciting when they show up. So one owl that is fairly unique in that it is in one of the two groups of owls. So we have the what we call the typical owls. This is in the other group, in the barn owl group, and that is the barn owl. Now, despite being living almost worldwide, Vermont is really at the edge of the barn owl range. So we were never really in the core of its habitat. And the barn owl probably did well here in Vermont in its agricultural heyday. So back when there was a lot of open land and plenty of rodents around, this owl probably did all right in Vermont. But as our farms have turned over, as agriculture has intensified, the barn owl has pretty much disappeared from this state. There is a possibility that they might still nest in very small numbers, if at all, in the Champlain Valley. But you can go further south and west and see this owl in North America. And it's pretty unique, and you can tell it from the other owls, the typical owls, because it has that almost heart-shaped face. So you can see, unlike the round face, the very round face of most of the owls we're going to look at, the barn owl has this really heart-shaped face. And here's some more pictures of a barn owl. I'm going to talk a little bit later about barn owl conservation as well. And I'll play this sound for you, but a warning, it is a really terrifying sound. Barn owls are not one that hoots. They actually scream. Oh. So really a frightening noise, really a frightening noise to hear in the middle of the night, that barn owl scream. One of the owls we do have still nesting here in Vermont is the eastern screech owl. This is a really small owl, only getting to be slightly less than 10 inches tall. And it lives throughout the eastern part of North America, but not going into the boreal zone, not going too far north. Vermont is again at the edge of this bird's range, both to the east and to the north. So where we see this owl in Vermont is usually closely associated with water. So primarily in the Champlain Valley and in the Connecticut River Valley. Occasionally, it turns up in central Vermont or along the Green Mountains, and but that's not typical. Usually it's near water. And one of the reasons it's usually near water is that it loves to eat crayfish. So, and it will often eat amphibians as well during the breeding season. So it's a lowland species, and it's a bird that's population has declined pretty considerably in Vermont. It's declined by 40%. And one thing that folks can do if you happen to live in an area where eastern screech owl lives in Vermont, so perhaps the Champlain Valley or the Connecticut River Valley, you can actually help them out by putting up a nest box. This is one of the owls that nests in a cavity and will gladly live and nest in a nest box if you put one up. And there's an example on the left that shows you just how small an eastern screech owl is, comparing it to a European starling there. And then one of the things that's really fun about eastern screech owl is they come in a few different colors. On the left is the gray morph. All the way on the right is the red morph. And in the middle, there are these kind of brown morphs that are a mix of gray and red. And so they end up looking almost brown. So this is an owl that comes in a variety of colors, which is really exciting. And I'll play you the Screech Owl Call. It makes a couple different noises. You'll hear this sort of descending trill, and sometimes it almost makes a whinny that sounds sort of like a horse. So you hear that sort of trill noise, and that's a sound also that can get small songbirds, really riled up. Eastern screech owls do hunt small songbirds. So if you can make that sort of trill, which some people can do really well, you can get small songbirds like chickadees really excited thinking there's a predator around. From that, we'll look at our largest owl that nests here in Vermont, and that's the great horned owl. It's a really big bird, and it has a really big wingspan as well. This owl is found throughout North America. The only place it doesn't live in North America is the high Arctic and the tundra. And throughout its range, it takes advantage of a lot of different habitats. I've seen this bird at 10,000 feet in the Rocky Mountains, and I've seen it in the desert of New Mexico, and I've seen it in the Pacific Northwest. So it's a pretty adaptable bird throughout its range. They often make their nests in nests that are former red-tailed hawk nests, or maybe a heron rookery. So think high up in a tree snag, and their nests often look like a jumble of sticks. This is a bird that has also decreased in Vermont. And what's really exciting though about great horned owl is now is the time to go out and look for them. Because they're calling now and they're starting their nesting season. So they love areas where there is a patchwork of different habitats. So maybe some mixed forests that border some field. So near farms, but areas that have big stands of trees, particularly big stands of pine trees. They really like big stands of conifers. And so they are nesting now. We'll take a look at couple of the things that are really important to key in on the great horned owl is this sort of round orange face it has. There's another owl we'll look at that has a very similar looking face. It has these ear tufts. Now these ear tufts or horns, they're not actually ears. It's a clump of feathers, and they use those feathers to communicate. So they might be used in courtship or in defending a territory. And so they can sort of control those tufts, how much they stand up. And they have this really beautiful barring along their front. And throughout their range, they're really diverse in their coloring. Here in the Northeast, they tend to be pretty orange and fairly heavily barred. Further north, they can be really dark. In the desert Southwest, they can be very pale and almost gray. And everywhere they live, they sort of color is adapted to blend in with their surroundings. And you can see it also has this bright white patch on its throat. And when it's calling, the birds will actually take in air to this patch in their throat, and they will puff it up so you can see this bright white patch. And when they're calling, they also do this interesting thing where they kind of tip over sideways, stick out their head, extend that white throat pouch, and hold their ear tufts really high as they call. So I'll show you that in just a moment. You can see there is a picture of an owl that looks like it's getting ready to call, perhaps, and it has that bright white throat patch kind of extended. We're going to listen to a few different sounds, the territorial hoot, and the mnemonic for the great horned owl is "Who's awake? Me too." So sort of this has a two-part, the "who's awake" that can sort of sound like a stutter, and an answer, "Me too." And you heard a couple different sounds there. And oftentimes when a pair is either courting or defending territory, you'll hear an echo. So usually you'll hear the male start. He's got a little bit deeper voice, and the female, who has a little bit higher voice, will echo right after him, and sometimes they'll even overlap. And it's amazing, you know, once you listen to enough great horned owls, you'll start to hear differences in the vocalizations, and you can actually record them and look at a recording, a spectrogram of their vocalization, and you can tell individual great horned owls from each other, which is really useful in research and being able to track the movements or the pair relationships of individuals, which is really, really cool. So you can get to know the great horned owls near you really well. And this is a really good time to go out and look for this species, because they're starting to pair up as early as midwinter. So January, usually we have a day in the United States that people play this very strange game with a football, and they call it Super Bowl Sunday, and I celebrate Superb Owl Day instead. So on that day, which falls in midwinter, it's a perfect day to go out and look for superb owls. And so I have gone out and found great horned owls calling pretty much every year on that day. And by February, they are starting to lay their eggs. And on the left, you can see a picture that a friend of mine sent to me earlier this week. She was looking at what she thought was a bald eagle nest, and actually in previous years was a bald eagle nest. And this year there was a little head with some ear tufts sticking out. So likely a female great horned owl that is already incubating eggs. So great horned owls will take over bald eagle nests if they make it there first. And usually they're starting nesting first before bald eagles, but they've also been known to kick bald eagles out of their nests, which is pretty impressive. Bald eagles are massive birds, and yet great horned owls will take them on. And so there are females right now that are already incubating eggs, and they will incubate eggs even while it's snowing. You'll see there are great pictures of great horned owls on the nest just covered with snow. And the reason they're getting started so early is because when you are such a big bird, it takes you a long time to raise your young to the point where they are fully grown and able to fend and hunt for themselves. So because great horned owls are so big, it's going to take them all summer long and into the fall for their young to be ready to fend for themselves. So they have to start really early. One really cool thing that I found is this live stream of a great horned owl nest in Kansas. And it's a live stream that in past years was the Kansas Bald Eagles live stream. But now it's been taken over great horned owls. So the picture on the bottom right is from today in Kansas. And you can see that's likely a female great horned owl sitting on eggs. So really, really fun thing to do if you're looking for something to watch or put on as background. I really recommend this great horned owl live stream. It's a lot of fun. Perhaps the owl that most people are familiar with is the barred owl. The barred owl lives throughout Vermont, and they really love forest habitat, but they can make it into a variety of different habitats as well. And they're pretty tolerant of places where forest has been disturbed as well. So areas that maybe have been developed or have more houses, barred owls are able to find smaller patches of habitat that will allow them to nest. And because of this adaptability and also the increase in forest as in the last 100 years in Vermont, we've seen a dramatic increase in barred owls in Vermont and throughout North America. Now, barred owl was an eastern species, pretty much exclusively west of the Mississippi, a little bit further, but not east of the Mississippi, but not much further. And they have now made it all the way to the Pacific Northwest and the Northern Rockies. I'll talk a little bit about that later, but the theory is that as folks moved west and settled, that they planted groups of trees in the plains near small towns that allowed barred owls to sort of hopscotch across the continent and get established in the West. And it's created some issues there. And these owls create some issues here as well. They compete with other owls for habitat and for food, other raptors for habitat and for food. And it's not their fault that they're super adaptable, but it does have some conservation concerns for other species.
Zach, really quick, would you let us know how to read those range maps?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So this range map showing North America in the middle, in the bottom middle, the purple, the dark purple is where it nests or has historically nested, and the light purple is where this owl has moved to or where it might spend part of the year. And I'll try and explain that as some of these range maps get a little bit more complicated with owls that migrate. So some really key features to look at when we're identifying a barred owl: has that very round, really round face, very brown overall, and the barring refers to the vertical brown streaking on the front of the owl. It has these vertical bars, but it also has these kind of horizontal white checker bars on its wings as well. And it has these very striking black eyes and a yellow bill. So this is the one that you're most likely to see in Vermont, and the one you're most likely to hear. And here's a pretty classic barred owl vocalization, which sounds like, "Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all?" You can hear a couple other sounds in there. Sometimes barred owls will make these really weird sounds, or even in a group or in a pair will make these sounds called caterwauling, where they'll actually interact with each other and make these noises that sound almost like monkey screeches. And oftentimes people will blame strange sounds in the middle of the night on red fox or fisher, and sometimes those animals do make strange noises, but oftentimes if you're hearing some really strange screaming, screeching sounds in the night, it's probably a barred owl. Slightly smaller than our barred owl is the long-eared owl. Now this is a really peculiar owl in Vermont. It lives throughout North America, and you can see in the range map in the bottom middle, the red and the purple. The red is where it nests in the summer only. The purple is where it nests in the summer and lives in the winter. And the blue is where it moves in the winter. So there are some areas where this owl lives year round, and there are lots of owls that live further north that move south for the winter. And so Vermont is in an area where there are some long-eared owls that nest here, but there are a lot more that move south into Vermont in the winter time. So this is a really good time of year to go look for long-eared owls and listen for long-eared owls. They tend to be pretty fairly sensitive to disturbance. And so, and they also are really specialist in terms of habitat for nesting here in Vermont. And their nests have almost exclusively been found in dense stands of cedars in the Champlain Valley. There are some cedar stands in other places of Vermont that they've been found as well, but they're really liking these dense stands of cedars, particularly near open brushy fields. So not deep woods like barred owls. And they have a really high turnover of their area, and so it's really hard to predict exactly where these owls will turn up from year to year.
Zach, would you explain the atlas maps?
Oh yeah, sorry about that. The atlas maps on the right, the maps of Vermont on the right are a picture of where these owls have been documented nesting. So when you see a really dark green square, it means that they were confirmed nesting in that area in the second Vermont Breeding Bird Atlas, which took place in the 2000s. And the lighter squares are where they might have been seen during that period, but not necessarily confirmed nesting there. So you can see that the long-eared owl is almost exclusively nesting in the Champlain Valley here in Vermont. And this is an owl that looks pretty similar to our great horned owl. The face can sometimes have this more scrunched in appearance than the very kind of wide and round and wide face of the great horned owl. It does also have ear tufts, and you can see it's got a much darker barring on the front of it, and it doesn't have that big bright white throat pouch that the great horned owl has. And I'm going to show you a couple more pictures here in flight, in particularly that show the difference. The long-eared owl is also a lot trimmer. It's a lot slimmer than a great horned owl. Great horned owls are really heavy birds. So this is a much smaller, more slim owl overall. And so it's amazing. These owls are here nesting, but also, as I said, many of them show up in the wintertime from further north. And when they're moving south, they can sometimes show up in really unusual places. So this person, Jesse Fox, shared pictures of this owl that showed up in their backyard in Burlington, of all places. So this is a really suburban area of our most populous city. And they noticed they had this owl in their backyard, and it was a long-eared owl. And you can see the top left, you can see that kind of face that can have that kind of scrunched in appearance compared to the very wide face of a great horned owl. And then when it flies, you can see, I've highlighted on the picture in the bottom right, on the underside of the wing, it has this really dark comma on its wrist. They have this wrist patch that looks like a really dark comma on the underside. And on the upper side, it has this almost buffy patch on the upper side of its wing on these really dark brown primary flight feathers. So on the upper side of the wing, you see these flight feathers that are mostly dark brown, except at their base has this sort of tan buffy look to it. And then the underside, that really dark comma mark. Great horned owls also have a little bit of a comma mark, but it tends not to be as pronounced as long-eared owls are. And the long-eared owl call is a really simple one. It is just this series of solo hoots that can have this sort of raspy quality. Oh, I'm gonna go back. So just those sort of single hoots that go over and over and over and repeat. The long-eared owl also has this peculiar habit of roosting communally. So some owls, like barred owls, tend to be by themselves or in pairs or in small family groups. The long-eared owl, particularly in the winter, will get together in big congregations called parliaments, where you can see anywhere from a few up to dozens of these owls. And in Europe, in Serbia, there is a long-eared owl roost where there are regularly up to 800 long-eared owls coming to roost in this park in the middle of this small town. And it's connected to the fact that the people in this community are still using traditional agricultural practices. So they're not using pesticides, they're not using really intensive agriculture. So there's a lot of rodents, and these long-eared owls stick around to eat all the rodents. And during the day, they're roosting in this park. So it's put that on your list of places to visit. Is this town in Serbia where you can walk around the park and have hundreds of owls in the trees above you. Closely related to the long-eared owl is the short-eared owl, very similar in size, although a little bit smaller, and a beautiful buffy bird overall. These rich dark browns with these lighter tan colors. Unfortunately, this is an owl that has declined pretty precipitously in Vermont, mainly due to the fact that agriculture has changed in the state. This is a bird that nests directly on the ground. So they're nesting in open fields and grassy fields. They're nesting right on the ground. And so they need to have undisturbed fields. So think of places like prairies or tundra further north. And back 100 years ago or so, when we had large open farmlands that were mainly pasture in Vermont, these short-eared owls did really well. But there's not very much of that habitat left here in Vermont. And the last place is the kind of central Champlain Valley, so around Dead Creek Wildlife Management Area. And these owls likely don't nest in Vermont anymore. But they do come here in the winter from further north. And right now is a great time to go out. You can visit Dead Creek Wildlife Management Area in the early evening and see short-eared owls flying around. And they are pretty amazing because during, even though they're fairly small, they have a massive wingspan compared to the body size. And when they fly, they almost look like a giant moth. They're really impressive to see in flight. You can see it does have these little ear tufts. They're not very big like the long-eared owl, but it does have these little ear tufts. And similarly to the long-eared owl, you can see those dark commas on the underside of the wing on the wrist. So short-eared owls have that same comma underneath their wing. And on the left, you can see where it spends a lot of time down low in grasses and other vegetation. And it makes a really strange sound that's like a bark. And it doesn't make any hooting sounds at all. Our smallest owl here in Vermont is the northern saw-whet owl. This is a really tiny bird, only getting to be about 8 inches long and not weighing very much at all. It nests throughout the Northeast, a little bit through southern Canada, throughout the Rocky Mountains, and then up into the southern part of Alaska as well. And then it often moves south in the winter as well from the more northern places. Now here in Vermont, we're right in the middle of its eastern range. So we have northern saw-whet owls that nest here in Vermont. And then in the winter, we also have a lot of saw-whet owls that come here from further north to spend the winter. They're really a forest-dwelling owl and sometimes are nesting in trees and cavities left over by woodpeckers. So it's a cavity nester. And they've declined in Vermont. But one of the things you can do to help this species out is to create spaces for them to nest, and by putting up nest boxes. So if you have a really nice stand of woods, perhaps you live in the Green Mountains, and you have a lot of forest around you, you can put up nest boxes for this bird and perhaps get them to nest near you. And in fact, they've been found nesting in boxes that were put up to help other birds as well, including the one on the left. You can see that picture at the left. That was a box that was probably made for a wood duck, and a family of saw-whet owls took it over. And there's a young saw-whet owl sticking its head out of that nest box. They're really amazing at camouflage, and you can see them blending into thick tangles of vegetation during the day. The saw-whet owl call is just a steady, monotonous toot, almost sounds like a truck backing up. And I'll share some more about saw-whet owls as when we get to talking about conservation. One owl that we don't have very often here in Vermont is the Boreal Owl. And as you can see from the range map, this cousin of the saw-whet owl nests much further north in the boreal forest. But in some winters, it will come south, but it's very hard to find, though it has been found nesting in some places at high elevations in the Northeast. It has been documented nesting in the White Mountains, and there are a couple records of hearing boreal owls calling in good habitat here in Vermont during the breeding season. And it's also they've been captured at banding stations in the winter here in Vermont. So it's one that you're not likely to encounter, but every once in a while, boreal owls will show up in Vermont. I'm going to skip through a few of these boreal owl, some of these videos, so I can make sure we fit in time to talk about owling at the end. Another species that we don't often see, but see occasionally in the winter, is the northern hawk owl. So this hawk owl is an amazing bird that's sort of a part owl, part hawk. It looks like an owl and is indeed an owl, but it hunts more like a hawk, where it's hunting during the day and uses these really fast flight to looking more like a small falcon when it's hunting. Again, a bird that breeds primarily in the northern boreal forest, but just about once every 10 years in the wintertime, one of these will head south and end up in Vermont, and people will come to see it from all over the place. And there you're looking at pictures of the northern hawk owl and seeing those kind of really angular wings, more like a hawk's wings than rounded owl wings, and that really angular tail looking more like a falcon tail, used for fast flight and catching its prey. One really amazing bird, again, another boreal species that we don't often get to see, is the great gray owl. And this again is found only in eruptive years. So just like the boreal owl and the northern hawk owl, the movement of this bird south in the wintertime has to do with prey. So in years where there aren't very many rodents in the northern forest, they have to come further south in the winter in order to find enough food. And so this is definitely another owl that tends to attract attention when they do show up in the Northeast. They are massive birds, and despite their size, they tend to blend in really well. And you can see that picture on the right. The only thing giving away are the yellow eyes and that little bit of white counter shading underneath on the bottom of its face. And then the one that we're probably most familiar with as a winter visitor is the snowy owl, the beautiful white owl of the north that breeds way up in the Arctic tundra and comes south in the winter. And these snowy owls usually show up, a couple of them, in the winter in Vermont. But some years when there's not very much prey at all, or a year following a real breeding success where there are a lot of young owls, we can see dozens of them in Vermont in the wintertime. And this year there have been a few owls, snowy owls around Vermont, which is really exciting. They vary in their coloration, so white overall, but the younger they are, they tend to be much darker, and females also tend to be much darker. The older they get, and also the males tend to be much lighter overall. So if you have a really, really dark looking snowy owl like the one on the left, that might be a young female. If you have a almost pure white snowy owl, that might be an older male. So I want to spend some time talking about the lives of owls and how we conserve them, and also how can we go look for them and listen for them in a respectful way. So we talked a little bit about this earlier, but the spotted owl that lives in the Pacific Northwest is a cousin of the barred owl. And as barred owls arrived in the Pacific Northwest, they have competed with the spotted owl for nesting habitat. The barred owl is a little bit bigger and more aggressive than the spotted owl, and it will kick them off of their territory or even kill them. And the conservation issue is that these spotted owls require really specific old growth forests in the Pacific Northwest. And those old growth forests are also a great source of income for the logging industry in the Pacific Northwest. And so the needs of this owl has come up against the needs of communities that are supported by the logging industry. The spotted owl has declined by 77% in Washington state since the mid-80s. And as they've been protected under the Endangered Species Act, they've come under threat from the logging industry. And so back when this controversy was really at its peak, you would see people in logging communities that were really hating this species because it was seen to be threatening them as habitat was conserved for this spotted owl. So there's a lot of work being done right now to both conserve the habitat in old growth forests that spotted owls need, and also to help control the barred owl population that has arrived there after not having kind of evolved somewhere else. And that unfortunately includes sometimes removing the barred owls from spotted owl territory or habitat. And then a little closer to home, here at North Branch Nature Center, we are part of this program called Project OwlNet. And Project OwlNet is monitoring migratory owls, particularly northern saw-whet owls, throughout their range. And so in the fall, as northern saw-whet owls are migrating south, we are catching them at the Nature Center, putting a little metal bracelet, a band around their leg, and then measuring them, weighing them, recording their age and their sex, and then letting them go. And the hope is that they will either be captured at another site where we can tell where they went, or they will be captured at the Nature Center in a subsequent year. And so we do this in, starting sometimes in late September, but primarily through October and into early November as well. And it's a program that we open up to the public. And it's a lot of fun to come and see these amazing little birds really close up. We had to adapt it this past fall to make sure that the human attendees were safe, but because we're doing it primarily outside, we were still able to accommodate small groups of people. And we hope to continue to do that next fall as well. And so what we've learned through this, so there's some pictures you can see. We carry the owls in these this homemade canister, and the cans you see are actually tomato paste cans. So that gives you an idea of just how tiny these birds really are. And then we're putting this little metal band around their leg that has a unique number, sort of like a social security number. So if they're captured again, we can tell who they are. And these are all the places throughout North America that are doing the same project and tracking these northern saw-whet owls. And here you can see some of the connections we've made. Birds we've captured at North Branch have later been captured, or birds that have been captured in other places have later been captured at North Branch. So we have connections with places as far away as Wisconsin and Kentucky and northern Quebec with our owls. So it's a pretty amazing way to get to know this species. And we've learned some really cool stuff. You know, most of the birds we catch are young birds in the first year of their life. We hardly ever catch birds that are more than 6 years old. And it's just a really remarkable way that you can get an up close and personal moment with these birds. And our Adopt an Owl program that Sean mentioned at the beginning is a way to support this work that we're doing. One of the big threats to owls and to other raptors as well is what's called bioaccumulation, where as poisons get introduced to the food chain, they tend to collect in predators. So owls, unfortunately, can become the victims of rodent poisons. So as folks are trying to dissuade rats or mice from entering homes or from threatening agricultural products, owls are eating those rodents, and then they're falling victim to them. And so there's been a lot of effort in educating people about not using these products in order to protect raptors. And some areas have even banned these products because of their effect on raptors. And one of the main threats to owls, though, is their habitat, threat to their habitat, particularly nesting habitat, because many owls are really sensitive to disturbance. And one really cool project being run out in California is putting up barn owl nesting boxes near agricultural areas. So they're partnering with vineyards and farms to put these boxes up. It allows the barn owls places to nest. It allows the researchers the opportunity to study them, and it provides really great rodent control for the farms. And in fact, a pair of barn owls that are raising a family can eat about 1,000 rodents in a season. So that's a pretty amazing and effective rodent control right there. So owls are a really great animal to have around. And I want to spend the last few minutes talking about how to go look for these birds and how to go look for them responsibly. And the photo you're seeing is not intentional. This was a great gray owl that was being seen in New Hampshire. Folks were going to see it and were keeping their distance. But great gray owls are often not very wary of people because they live so far north that they hardly ever see humans. And so these photographers and birders had gathered and they were keeping their distance. The great gray owl flew over across this field toward them and decided to perch on this person's head. So pretty amazing. And you know, the people weren't doing anything wrong in this. Just a very comical moment with this amazing bird. And you know, so I want to start by saying that these birds are living their lives, and particularly in winter when there's not a lot of food, and during the nesting season when they're trying to raise their young, they're really sensitive. And so whenever we're going out to observe them, their welfare should be the number one priority. And this is an unfortunate example of where that was not necessarily the case for these folks. And sometimes there are places where owls are known to roost that can fall victim to this sort of behavior, where the owls will be so disturbed by people that they will stop hunting because they're more concerned about the people present than they are about hunting for food. And that can be a real problem, because if the owl is more focused on the people that are watching it than it is on finding food, there are owls that can actually starve to death despite having food around, just because they're being too closely observed by humans. And there's also cases of owls abandoning nests or roost sites where humans have been approaching too closely in order to see them. So whenever we're going to look for owls, if we're seeing an owl, we want to make sure we're not getting too close. I usually say about 150 feet, which ends up being about 3 school bus lengths. There's a pretty respectful distance to keep from most owls. They can go about their lives. And, you know, we want to be really conscious of its behavior too. If the owl or any bird flies away from you, that's a good sign that you're getting too close. Or if it changes what it's doing, if it moves around, or if it's looking directly at you, it's a sign that you're probably too close. And then if it gets this really kind of straight up and down posture, you can see in both of these pictures, the owl is standing really straight up. On the left, it's closed its eyes so that you don't see those big eyes standing out. And these owls are trying really hard to camouflage right now. And if you're seeing an owl that is working really hard to blend in, it's making its body really narrow, it's closing its eyes, that's a good sign that it's threatened by your presence. And you should start slowly backing away. That way you're not disturbing it further. Sometimes when owls are disturbed, and you can see, you're going to see in this video, this saw-whet owl was roosting. And again, I'm showing this video not necessarily to disparage the people who made it, just using it as an educational opportunity. This owl was roosting, and you can see that it has its eyes mostly closed. It's trying really hard to camouflage. And as it's approached, it's going to make this sound called a beak snap. It's actually snapping its bill to let them know that it's not happy. So you could see in that video that posture where that owl has sort of partially closed its eyes, really trying to stay hidden. Another thing that can help find owls actually is a mobbing behavior. You heard a little bit of that in the video I just showed you, where if an owl is around, oftentimes smaller birds like chickadees or titmice that could be prey of an owl will start making alarm calls. And this works all the way up to great horned owls I've found fairly regularly by listening to crows. So if you're hearing a group of crows that sound really upset and they're maybe dive bombing a particular tree or an area, you might look and find something like a great horned owl there. I'm going to show you a quick example of the screech owl being mobbed. So when you are hearing a group of small songbirds that are really agitated, it's a good idea to look for a predator that could be around, particularly looking for an owl that might be hidden nearby. I want to talk about, just take the last couple of minutes to talk about, how to go owling. It's a great time of year to just go out listening, particularly in the evening, right at dusk or right after dusk is a really great time to go listening for things like great horned owls and barred owls. And throughout the winter, I will play or make owl sounds that can elicit a response from owls. And this is something that birders often do for owls. And it doesn't change the owl's behavior a lot in the most of the year. Now, anytime you're interacting with a bird, either calling it or looking at it or just in the same area, you're going to be affecting its behavior. But when it comes to breeding season, so once we get into the nesting season and owls are starting to pair up and lay eggs, it's really important that we're not making any owl sounds. We're not imitating an owl or playing any owl recordings, because that could have a negative effect on the owl's nesting success. So we're definitely into that time now where owls are starting to nest. Great horned owls have already laid eggs. Other owls are starting to nest within the next month or two. So it's a great time to just go out and listen for owls. And I'm going to provide you with a couple resources right here as we close up to do some more further learning about owls. The International Owl Center is a really cool place in the Midwest that does some owl rehab work, does a little bit of research, but has done this really amazing winter speaker series. They've had some amazing owl researchers from all over the world giving presentations. And if you go on the International Owl Center website, you can listen to old talks from owl researchers, including this guy, Jonathan Slatt, who wrote this book called Owls of the Eastern Ice. Jonathan is a researcher, an owl researcher, who actually spent several years living in Eastern Russia and in this really remote, rugged area, researching the largest owl in the world, the Blackeston's fish owl. It's a really amazing read, and I highly recommend it. Another book that talks a lot more about all sorts of owls is The Hidden Life of Owls by Lee Calvez. That's a really easy read and has some amazing facts about owls. To learn more about owl research, you can look at the Owl Research Institute. They're out of Montana, and they do work with lots of different owl species. And then two projects, other research projects in particular, is Project OwlNet, which is the one we work with at the Nature Center, tracking saw-whet owls, and then Project Snowstorm, which is an effort to monitor and track snowy owl populations. And with that, I'll say thank you to all of you for your interest in owls. I hope you will all get out owling this evening. I know once I'm done here, I'm gonna put my layers on and go listen for great horned owls. And with that, I will open it up for questions. Sean is gonna moderate the questions for a bit based on what folks had on the chat, but I'm gonna stick around even after that. So if folks have questions later on, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thanks so much, Zach. And thanks everybody for tuning in tonight. Thanks to Green Mountain Audubon Society as well for putting this on with us. I just want to mention again that a few things to mention before we jump into questions. One is that we'll have the recording of this up on our website, northbranchnaturecenter.org/presentations in just a couple days. So if you want to see this again or catch parts you missed, you can find it there. And I'll also go ahead and put, along with that presentation, hyperlinks to all of the resources that are on this slide right now. So you can find that there. I also just want to encourage everybody to go visit our website, become a member, make a donation, join our mailing list if you'd like to know more about other programs that we have coming up, both webinar series like this, as well as in-person birding and owling and other sorts of programs that we do. I put in the chat bar a little while ago a link to our Adopt an Owl program and our Northern Saw-Whet Owl research, so you can check that out as well. While I remember a couple of the other things that I meant to tell you, I will ask Zach a couple of questions that we've been getting. Great questions throughout, everybody. I'll start with some shorter ones. Zach, do owls hunt turkeys?
Oh, that's a great question. Great horned owls will eat just about anything they can kill, including other great horned owls, but definitely turkeys fit that bill. So if a great horned owl can manage to kill it, and they have pretty giant talons, they will eat it. So yeah, wild turkey definitely on the menu for a great horned owl.
So you mentioned a lot of owls tonight. Could you give on one hand, like the top 5 owls that people are most likely to see in Vermont?
Yeah, pretty much anywhere in Vermont, you're going to find a barred owl. I heard someone who works in owl research once say, you can throw a rock into the woods anywhere in Vermont and hit a barred owl. And that's pretty much true. They're one that you can see and hear in pretty much any area of the state. So that's number 1 is barred owl. Number 2 is probably great horned owl. Though they're not super dense in any part of the state, they're found pretty much throughout. So you can go out and find a great horned owl, and they're very vocal, particularly this time of year. And they're big, so they're hard to miss. So great horned owl would be number 2. Northern saw-whet owl is pretty tiny, so it's hard to find, but they are pretty vocal. Right now, you might hear them doing their call. They're kind of the male's attractive mating call. You might hear the males doing that either on territory, or they're still migrating north trying to find a female. And then in the fall, they make these sort of screeching sounds as they're migrating south. And that's a bird where we will catch, we've had nights at the Nature Center where we've caught 20 saw-whet owls in the course of a few hours, just at the Nature Center. So in the fall, in October, there are thousands and thousands of these little tiny saw-whet owls moving probably through every corner of Vermont. So it's one that's probably in your backyard at some point in the fall. You just have to be out there listening and looking for it. And sometimes calling to them, doing that call, which is really easy to do. It's just sort of a short whistle. You can get them to respond. So those are sort of the top 3 are barred owl, great horned owl, and northern saw-whet owl that you can find in Vermont.
Since we're on the subject of saw-whet owls, a couple of questions about those, and I'll encourage folks to check out our saw-whet owl banding page to learn a little bit more. But could you talk a little bit about how we do that, and particularly the safety? So the nets that we use. So there's a question about the nets that we use, and also about what they're feeling when you put them in a tomato paste can.
Yeah. So, as I said, when we're owling, and particularly when we're doing research, the welfare of the owls is number 1. So we wouldn't be doing it if we weren't certain that it wasn't going to harm the owls. And so the way it works at the Nature Center and other owl research stations is that we have a big speaker that we put in the kind of brushy woods on the edge of the field. And that is broadcasting out a saw-whet owl call. As they're migrating south through the valley, they're hearing that call, and they're coming in to investigate who is this owl that is sort of hanging out there. And around this speaker, we put these nets that are strung up between poles. These nets have really fine mesh, and it's really light. And what's happening is the owl is hitting the net, and it's getting very loosely caught in the net. So it's getting tangled just enough so that it can't fly out of the net again. And it's sort of getting held in these little pockets. So the owl is actually sort of supported in the net. It's not gonna injure itself flapping around at all. And we're checking the nets pretty regularly. During the busy part of the night, we're checking the nets every half an hour. So they're not in there very long. And we're very carefully kind of untangling them from the net. And you see the tomato paste can is pretty small. The owls look a lot bigger than that, but they're mostly feathers. So when we're sliding them in there, their feathers kind of compress. So they fit in there pretty snugly. Now, we wouldn't want them to be in there too loose. If it was too loose, they would be able to kind of flap around and injure themselves. Obviously, if it was too tight, they wouldn't be able to breathe. So we found that the tomato paste cans are kind of the perfect size where they can still move a little bit, enough to breathe, but they're not, moving around a lot and injuring themselves. And then we try and minimize the time we spend actually doing all the measurements and banding the bird. That way, the process of actually banding them takes no more than 5 minutes, so that the total time from them being in the net, so caught, say if we're catching them every half an hour, we're checking the nets every half an hour. If they were to hit the net right after a net check, to the time that we are banding them is probably no more than 45 minutes, which sounds like a lot of time, particularly when it's a cold early November night. But these owls are made for the cold. They are so soft and covered with tiny little feathers, you wouldn't believe it. I know, Sean, that you're moderating the questions based on the chat, but I did see a young person with a hand up that I would love to provide the opportunity. Someone with a J name, and now they've disappeared, so maybe they had to leave.
Well, I'll ask another.
There's Jake.
And then go searching for that.
Yeah, I see Jake has his hand up, so maybe we weren't planning to take questions, but maybe we can answer Jake's question.
Well, I'm wondering if Jake can throw the question into the chat bar, and then I'll make sure we ask that next. We always like to put our young ones at the top of the list here. All right, so a little more rapid fire here, Zach, since we have so we're not going to have time for everybody's questions, but we'll try our best here. Let's see, Zach, could you talk briefly about the ethics around posting locations of owls?
Yeah, that's something that's come up a lot lately, particularly around snowy owls. Snowy owls tend to draw a lot of attention and admiration, which is great. I love seeing people get excited about owls, but I worry sometimes when people's behavior could affect the owls negatively. And so that's something you should, before you share the location of an owl, something you want to consider is there enough space in that place where the owl is where people can observe it from a distance? So are people going to be able to observe it from a distance? Is the owl going to be safe? And are the people who are going to look for it going to be safe? And there's been a couple circumstances lately where an owl was in a place right next to a busy road, and people were standing along the edge of a busy road in a place that could be dangerous for them. So those are a couple things to think about, before sharing the location. Is this a place where people can view the owl from a safe distance? Is it safe for the owl and safe for the people? And is it a place where they can do that from a public space? So we also don't want to encourage people to go on someone's private property to see an owl. And there's been some really unfortunate behavior lately around snowy owls, even people walking across an airport runway to go get closer to an owl. So, please consider that, when you're going to look for an owl and before you disclose the location of an owl. But generally, it's something that I I love to share with, owls with people. So if there is an owl in a place that meets those kind of criteria, I will share it so that people can get to enjoy it.
Thanks, Zach. I wanted to just mention that you're talking about our saw-whet owl research, and we had some other questions about that. If you go to our saw-whet owl banding page, you go to our website under the community science tab and owl banding, you can actually find your way over to a recorded banding demonstrations. You can actually watch us walk through the whole banding process and really see what that research entails kind of firsthand. And this upcoming fall, when we're doing the saw-whet research, once they start migrating through again, we'll do some more kind of Facebook Live or YouTube Live banding demonstrations, and we'll advertise those on our website as well. So you can kind of check out that research a little more up close and personal. Jake's question, Zach, is what's the most common owl in Vermont?
Yeah, that's definitely barred owl. That's the one that takes advantage of pretty much any little tiny bit of forest it can find throughout the state. So Jake, if you want to go look for owls, learn barred owl, learn its noises, learn what it looks like, and then go out into the woods and try and find one. And I bet you can.
Zach, how come some owls have yellow eyes and some have black eyes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. There are some owls that have orange eyes as well. And I'm not sure what the purpose of one color versus the other is. But one thing that's really interesting too, particularly on saw-whet owls, but other owls, is that you can actually tell their age by what the color of their eyes are. So a lighter yellow versus a darker yellow. So, there's a lot of differences within the owl coloration as well.
Some folks are wondering if you can see owls in more urban areas as well.
Yeah, one owl that does frequent urban areas is the barred owl. So barred owls can take advantage of even small forest patches within an urban area. So there are urban parks, say in downtown Burlington or in Burlington, where you can find barred owls. And then eastern screech owls are actually more likely to be found, at least here in Vermont, around places where there are people, and often are hunting in backyards and even nesting in people's backyards, particularly along waterways and near Lake Champlain. So if you go to Burlington, you can find eastern screech owls living in people's backyards, which is pretty cool.
Can you talk about nest boxes a little bit, in particular some general design strategies, what kind of species you might expect to find at them, and then also if it's too late this year to put up nest boxes?
Well, it may not be too late. It's never too late to put up a nest box. There's never a bad time to put up a nest box. There are better times, but there's never a bad time. There are some owls that nest on platforms. So like great horned owls will take over usually an old hawk nest or a great blue heron nest that's on an open platform. So you can actually put up platforms sort of like an osprey platform. You see those platforms that folks put up for ospreys. You can put up a platform and put a messy jumble of sticks on it to sort of encourage a great horned owl. But you can put up a range of boxes. Barred owls will actually nest in nest boxes. They're really big nest boxes, but there was a great research project going on in North Carolina that actually studied urban barred owls around a city that used these really big nest boxes to encourage barred owls to nest in, and all the way down to tiny saw-whet owls. So there's a great project called Nest Watch. It's run by Cornell's Lab of Ornithology, and it's a program that is aimed at studying bird nests and putting up nest boxes in an effort to study them. And Project Nest Watch has some great great nest box designs, including some for owls. So it depends on where you are. You know, if you are in a really wooded area, you might put up a nest box to get a saw-whet owl. If you live in the Champlain Valley, along near some water, you might get an eastern screech owl. So a few different options there.
Somebody's wondering about the ethics around using a flashlight when you're out owling.
Yeah, you know, there's a few different considerations there. In owling, like I said, anytime we're interacting with a bird, we're impacting its behavior. And we have to think about not only our effect on that bird, but a cumulative effect. And so that's one thing that worries me more so with using lights toward owls is owls that are more likely to have that happen over and over again. Now, there's not a real long-term effect for these owls, but it does momentarily affect their vision. So it may affect their ability to hunt right after they've been exposed to a bright light. But you know, I don't know that it's any more disturbing than just approaching it in general or calling to it. One thing that I definitely avoid is flash. So if you are wanting to take a picture of an owl at night, using a steady light, like a spotlight, is definitely, I think, less impactful than using a high flash on a camera.
Thanks. Great question around just different mythology around owls around the world and around the country, and how different peoples interpret owls and what it means to see one. And question is to just speak generally on that. Yeah,
I mean, so they're like, and folks are sort of getting to this in the connection of like owls as rodent eaters. You know, oftentimes owls are associated with agriculture. And we see this going back to ancient Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt, that, you know, often owls are depicted in scenes of agriculture. And folks, even thousands of years ago, were recognizing that owls did a really good job of controlling rodents. So they have that connection. They also have this sort of mysterious, almost ethereal connection, being primarily nocturnal, where we get to see them and hear them, but a lot of their lives are sort of hidden from us. So unlike, you know, most of the birds that we see during the day, we can, you know, see them courting and see them nesting and see all those parts of their lives. We sometimes hear and see owls, but most of their lives are sort of lived outside of our view. So I think there's a little bit of mystery to owls that makes them really charismatic as well. I hope that sort of answers that question.
That's great. Thanks, Zach. Why do some owls hang out near the road and also during the daytime?
Yeah, I talked about this a little bit on Tuesday. I'm doing a regular naturalist program on WDEV. And we talked about owls a little bit last Tuesday and had 3 different callers call into the program to talk about barred owls and had seen barred owls. And I think a lot of that has to do with our current snow conditions and the prey availability. We had a lot of really good snow, and then we had a little bit of rain and warm, and then it froze again. And what that made was this sort of dense crust on top of the snow. Now, barred owls are hunting by oftentimes going talon first through the snow to grab a small rodent. And when that thick crust of ice develops on top of the snow, it makes it really hard for them to punch through and get that rodent. And so this is why you're seeing a lot more barred owls hunting during the day. Barred owls are one of the few owls that we see sort of at any time of the day. They're called cathemeral rather than nocturnal or diurnal. Cathemeral means that they'll be active at any time of day that suits them. And but they're mostly hunting at night. But now that it's more challenging hunting conditions because of the snow, we're seeing a lot more owls, barred owls, hunting during the day, and hunting in places where there is less of that crunchy snow, which may be on the open edge of a road, which unfortunately puts barred owls much closer to traffic, and regularly in the winter, particularly in winters where that kind of crunchy snow crust develops and lasts for a while, we often see dead barred owls alongside roads.
And on that note, if people find an injured owl, what should they do?
Yeah, so injured owls and all sorts of injured birds. There is the Vermont Institute of Natural Science, VINS, down in Quechee, has a great program for rehab. They work with rehabbers all over the state. And they also rehab birds and raptors there. And they have a wildlife hotline. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but if you go on the VINS website, you'll be able to find the wildlife hotline. And that is like a great resource for any injured bird or any question about bird health, is the VINS hotline.
Great, thanks, Zach. There was a question about where is North Branch Nature Center located. We're in Montpelier, Vermont, just a couple miles outside of the downtown area. So please feel free and come on by and check out the trails where the facilities are closed at the moment due to COVID, but the property is always open 24/7. And so if you're looking for a place to go owling, well, that's not a bad place to try. Just a quick reminder, we'll have the recording of this available at our website, northbranchnaturecenter.org/presentations in just a couple of days. So if you want to check it out again or parts you missed, you can go over there and see that. So I think I'll say thank you to everybody now, and thanks again to Green Mountain Audubon Society for putting this on with us. And we'll kind of end the official portion of tonight here. You can dive into a few more questions if you'd like, Zach. But Zach, if you want to say any final thank yous or anything like that before we kind of go into a more informal thing, you're welcome to.
Yeah, thank you, Sean, for moderating this, and thank you again to Green Mountain Audubon Society for co-sponsoring. And thank you, all of you, for showing up, for your curiosity and interest in owls. And I really do hope that if it's not tonight, although tonight is great, I forgot to mention owling conditions. The best time to go out owling are on nights that are really, really cold, with no wind and clear. And the reason why really cold nights are the best nights to go owling is because the colder it is, the less moisture in the air, which means that an owl's voice can travel farther. So on nights where it's really cold, there's less moisture in the air, particularly really still, calm nights, owls are much more likely to vocalize. On nights where it's windy or warmer, you might not get as many owls calling. So tonight is perfect conditions to go out to listen to great horned owls. I think is going to be a great night for them. So I encourage you all to go out, try some owling, and I'm going to stick around for a little bit longer. Folks are welcome to stay for a bit more. And if you have a question, we'll sort of work through some more questions. And feel free to message me in the chat or raise your hand. I'll try and see folks' hands and allow them to ask a question.